Good morning, everyone. Please be seated. Before we call the first case on the docket, I need to address something that has been hanging over this courtroom like a dark cloud for the past 48 hours. Usually, when a defendant walks through those doors, they are just a name on a file. They are a citizen accused of a violation. But today, we are facing a situation that challenges the very integrity of this bench. What we are about to witness is not simply a case of public disturbance or disorderly conduct. It is a stress test of our democracy. It is a direct confrontation between the rule of law and the assumption of political immunity. So let me be crystal clear from the very first second. In this courtroom, justice does not bow to titles. It does not bow to campaign donors, and it certainly does not bow to threats. The defendant standing before me is Mr. Julian Alexander Sterling. He was born on February 14th, 2000, making him 24 years old. He lists his residence as the mayor's estate at 101 Government Plaza. Now, for the record and for everyone watching, Julian is the eldest son of Mayor Richard Sterling, the man currently elected to lead the city, a man who ran on a platform of law and order. I want to separate the father from the son for a moment. Mayor Sterling manages a municipal budget of $2 billion. He oversees the police department that made this arrest. He appoints the commissioners. That is significant power. And usually, power like that creates a bubble where people start to believe that reality is negotiable. I have looked at this defendant's file. Julian Sterling lists his occupation as brand ambassador and consultant. Yet, financial disclosures submitted to the court show no steady income stream, but credit card expenditures averaging $35,000 a month, paid entirely by accounts linked to the mayor's blind trust. Why am I telling you this? Because to understand the behavior we are about to discuss, you have to understand the environment that created it. We are dealing with a young man who has likely never heard the word no in a meaningful way, a young man who has been insulated from consequences by the thick walls of his father's office. But today, those walls are coming down. Today, we are not at Government Plaza. We are in the Hall of Justice. And here, the only currency that matters is the truth. I want to take you back to the night of Saturday, October 14th. The location is the Gilded Lounge, an upscale venue on the waterfront. At approximately 11:45 p.m., officers were dispatched following reports of a violent altercation. But this wasn't just a bar fight. This was a display of dominance. According to the initial briefing, and I am going to be very specific here because the public deserves to know exactly what happened, the incident didn't start with violence. It started with a demand for a table that was already occupied. When the staff refused to move a family celebrating an anniversary to accommodate Mr. Sterling and his entourage, the situation didn't just escalate, it exploded. And this is where the mindset of the defendant reveals itself. He didn't just argue with the manager, he didn't just leave, he weaponized his identity. Witnesses state and body camera footage confirms that his opening salvo was not a request, but a threat. He declared the venue would be shut down by morning by the health department if they didn't comply. This is not just bad behavior. This is the attempted weaponization of government resources for personal comfort. Now, this brings us to the moment law enforcement entered the equation. At 11:55 p.m., Sergeant David Miller, badge number 592, arrived on the scene. Sergeant Miller is a 20-year veteran of this force. He has served under 3 different mayors. He knows the streets, and he knows how to de-escalate a volatile situation. When Sergeant Miller approached the defendant, his objective was simple: separate the parties, assess the situation, and restore order. He didn't come in with handcuffs drawn. He came in with a conversation. He asked Mr. Sterling to step outside so they could talk. A reasonable request, a lawful order. But Mr. Sterling did not see a police officer. He saw a subordinate. And I want to read to you exactly what the defendant said, as recorded clearly on the officer's body-worn camera. This is verbatim. When asked to step outside, Julian Sterling looked Sergeant Miller in the eye and said, "Do you know who signs your paycheck? You work for my family. Get out of my face before I have you guarding a parking lot in the suburbs." Let me pause here, because this statement is not just disrespectful, it is dangerous. It reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how our society functions. The police do not work for the mayor. They do not work for the mayor's family. They work for the law. They work for the Constitution. They work for the people of this city, all of them, not just the ones with the last name Sterling. But it didn't stop at verbal abuse. This is where the entitlement turns into criminality. As Sergeant Miller attempted to guide him toward the exit, Mr. Sterling physically swatted the officer's hand away. He then took a step forward, closing the distance, and poked his finger into the officer's chest, right onto his badge. He poked the badge. Think about the symbolism of that action. He wasn't just touching a person, he was physically challenging the authority of the state. He was saying, "My status is higher than your authority." Sergeant Miller, displaying remarkable restraint that, quite frankly, many people in this courtroom might not have possessed, warned him. He said, "Sir, if you touch me again, you will be placed under arrest." And what was the response? Did reality sink in? Did the alcohol wear off enough for a moment of clarity? No. Mr. Sterling laughed. He pulled out his phone, an iPhone 15 Pro I see here in the evidence log, and started live streaming. He turned the camera on the officer and said to his followers, "Watch this clown try to arrest me. My dad is going to have his badge by morning." He treated an arrest, a deprivation of liberty, a serious legal event, as content, as entertainment. He believed so thoroughly in his immunity that he wanted an audience for his defiance. He wasn't afraid of going to jail because, in his mind, jail is a place for other people, for common people. Sergeant Miller had seen enough. At 12:03 a.m., he initiated the arrest, and even as the handcuffs were clicking shut, that distinct sound of metal on metal that usually brings a suspect back to reality, Mr. Sterling was still screaming threats, not threats of violence, but threats of career destruction. "Call the chief. Call my dad. You're done. You are finished." This young man was being handcuffed, led out of a bar in front of hundreds of people, and his only concern was how quickly he could mobilize his father's political machine to crush the officer doing his job. This is not just resisting arrest. This is an attempt to subvert the chain of command using nepotism as a weapon. Now, usually, after an arrest is made, the legal machinery takes over. There is a booking process, there is an arraignment, there is a bail hearing. It is a standard procedure that applies to everyone, from the homeless man on the corner to the CEO in the penthouse. But in the case of City versus Julian Sterling, the machinery didn't just run, it was attacked. I need everyone in this courtroom to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, because what happened in the 48 hours following Mr. Sterling's arrest is more dangerous to this city than any bar fight. Between Sunday morning, just hours after the defendant was booked, and this morning when I took the bench, my chambers became the target of a silent, coordinated campaign of pressure. I am not talking about legal motions filed by his attorney. That is proper. That is the right of every defendant. I am talking about back-channel influence. I want to read into the record a log of communications that were directed at this court, because transparency is the only disinfectant strong enough to clean this mess up. Sunday, 8:15 a.m. My personal cell phone rang. The number was blocked. The voice on the other end identified himself as Marcus Thorne, the chief of staff for Mayor Sterling. He didn't ask about the charges. He didn't ask about bail. He asked, and I quote, "Is there any way we can classify this as a mental health episode and seal the record before the press gets wind of it?" Let that sink in. A mental health episode, not because there is a medical diagnosis, but because it is a convenient narrative to hide the truth of intoxicated arrogance. Monday, 9:30 a.m. I received a visit in my chambers from Mr. Arthur Pendleton. For those who don't know, Mr. Pendleton is the chairman of the Safe Streets Committee and the largest single donor to the Judicial Re-election Fund. He sat in my chair and suggested that Sergeant Miller, the officer who was poked in the chest, was known for being over-aggressive and that perhaps the body cam footage was misleading. He then casually reminded me that my term on this bench is up for renewal next year. Let me be absolutely clear, that was not a conversation. That was a veiled threat. Tuesday, 7 a.m., a courier delivered an envelope. Inside was not a legal brief, but a character reference letter signed by the police commissioner himself, describing Julian as a respectful young man who volunteers for the community. Yet, nowhere in this letter does it mention the threats made to his own officer. Why am I telling you this? Why am I exposing the very people who run this city? Because this is exactly why Julian Sterling stands here today with a smirk on his face. He isn't smiling because he thinks he's innocent. He is smiling because he assumes the fix is in. He assumes that because his father is the mayor, because his family knows the donors, because the calls have been made, that this hearing is just a formality, a show. He believes that I am just another cog in his father's machine, that I will give him a slap on the wrist, seal the record, and send him home to his mansion. But the people who made those calls made a critical miscalculation. They forgot that this is not a political office. This is a court of law. And every time they tried to pressure me to go easy on him, they were actually providing evidence of why I need to be harder. They proved that this defendant has no concept of accountability because everyone around him has spent his entire life sweeping his mess under the rug. Well, gentlemen, I hope you are watching the live stream because I ran out of rugs. Representing Mr. Sterling today is Ms. Eleanor Vance from the firm Vance, Sterling and Partners. Yes, you heard that correctly. The defendant is being represented by a partner in his own uncle's law firm, a firm that, coincidentally, holds the contract for the city's municipal liability defense. The conflicts of interest in this room are so thick, you could cut them with a knife. But let's set that aside and look at the arguments presented. Ms. Vance is a formidable attorney. She stood before this bench and delivered a masterclass in minimization. She described the incident at the Gilded Lounge not as a criminal act, but as a misunderstanding fueled by youthful exuberance. She argued that Julian was under immense pressure due to his father's re-election campaign. She claimed that the officer was overly aggressive and that Julian's reaction was a fight or flight response triggered by fear. Fear. She used the word fear. She then submitted a proposal that, frankly, insults the intelligence of everyone in this room. The defense suggests that the charges be reduced to a simple noise violation. In exchange, Mr. Sterling is willing to write a letter of apology to Sergeant Miller and make a $50,000 donation to the Police Benevolent Fund, a donation. Let's call it what it really is. They are trying to write a check to make the assault on an officer go away. They are trying to turn a criminal proceeding into a transaction. But while Ms. Vance was speaking eloquently about her client's remorse and respect for the law, I was doing something she clearly wasn't. I was watching her client. For the last 20 minutes, while his freedom is theoretically on the line, Julian Sterling has not looked down in shame. He has not looked at the officer he assaulted. He has not looked at the parents he threatened. Instead, Mr. Sterling has been checking his watch, a Rolex Daytona, if I'm not mistaken. He has rolled his eyes 3 times. He sighed loudly when the prosecutor mentioned the word jail. And right now, as I speak, he is leaning back in his chair with a smirk that says he knows something we don't. Mr. Sterling, stand up. I said, stand up. You seem bored, Mr. Sterling. You seem to treat this courtroom like a waiting room at the DMV. Your attorney just spent 15 minutes telling me how sorry you are, how this was just one bad night in an otherwise exemplary life. But your body language is screaming the truth. You aren't sorry. You are annoyed. You are annoyed that you have to be here. You are annoyed that Sergeant Miller didn't bow down. You are annoyed that I haven't dismissed this case yet, so you can go back to your life of consequence-free luxury. I asked you a question before we started the sentencing phase. I asked if you had anything to say to Sergeant Miller. Do you remember your answer? You said, I guess I'm sorry he didn't know who I was. You didn't apologize for your actions. You apologized for his lack of recognition of your status. You still believe, even right now, standing in that well, that the crime here wasn't your behavior. It was his failure to submit to your authority. Ms. Vance, you can sit down. Your arguments about pressure and youthful mistakes have been dismantled by your own client's arrogance in real time. He isn't a scared kid. He is a man who believes he owns the place, and he is about to find out that the lease has expired. Before I pass sentence, I need to address the empty chair in the front row, the seat reserved for family. It is empty today. Mayor Sterling is not here. His press secretary released a statement saying he is busy attending to city business, but let's be honest, he isn't here because he knows what is coming, and he didn't want to be in the frame when the gavel came down. I want to speak directly to the camera because I know Richard Sterling is watching this from his office at City Hall. Mr. Mayor, you ran your campaign on a platform of law and order. You promised zero tolerance for crime. You put billboards up all over this city saying safe streets start with accountability. And yet, the greatest threat to the safety of our officers, the man who poked a sergeant in the chest and threatened to destroy his livelihood, is the man you raised. Julian didn't become this way by accident. Arrogance like this isn't genetic. It is learned. It is cultivated. It is funded. Every time you made a parking ticket disappear for him, you taught him that laws are optional. Every time you called a principal to get him out of suspension, you taught him that authority is negotiable. Every time you used your blind trust to pay off a credit card bill filled with unauthorized charges, you taught him that consequences are just a financial transaction. You didn't raise a son, Mr. Mayor. You raised a liability. You raised a young man who believes that his last name is a shield that can deflect anything, even a felony, and that is not love, that is neglect. When you shield a child from the consequences of their actions, you are not protecting them, you are crippling them, you are robbing them of the opportunity to develop a conscience. Julian stands here today at 24 years old, morally stunted. He has the emotional maturity of a toddler because he has never been allowed to feel the burn of a mistake. He thinks he can threaten a police officer because he has threatened teachers, coaches, and employees his whole life. And you, his father, always swooped in to fix it. Well, you can't fix this. Leadership is not just about balancing a budget or cutting a ribbon. Leadership starts at home. If you cannot govern your own house, how can you ask the citizens to trust you to govern the city? You have failed this young man. You fed his ego until it became a monster that turned on the very people you swore to protect. And now the court has to do the job that you refuse to do. The court has to be the father that says, no, Mr. Sterling, look at me. Stop looking at the camera. Your father isn't coming through that lens to save you. For the first time in your life, you are alone in a room where your name buys you absolutely nothing. The fix didn't work. The calls didn't work. The money didn't work. Today, we are going to introduce you to a concept you have successfully avoided for 2 decades, reality. Defendant, please rise. The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 2 years probation and mandatory anger management classes. The defense has proposed a monetary donation and a letter of apology. I have reviewed the guidelines. I have considered the mitigating factors, of which I found none. And I have considered the aggravating factors, of which there are too many to list. You came into this court believing that your father's name was a credit card with an unlimited limit. You thought you could swipe it one more time and walk out of here, but today the transaction is declined. On count 1, disorderly conduct. For threatening a business owner and weaponizing the health department for personal vendetta, I hereby sentence you to 30 days in the county jail. On count 2, resisting arrest. For refusing a lawful order and attempting to use political influence to subvert an arrest, I sentence you to 6 months. On count 3, assault on a law enforcement officer. For the physical act of poking Sergeant Miller in the chest, an act of supreme disrespect and physical aggression against the state, I am imposing the maximum penalty allowed by law, 1 year. Now, usually in cases with first-time offenders, These sentences would run concurrently, meaning at the same time. You would serve the longest one and be done in a year, or they would be suspended entirely. But you are not a usual offender. You are a danger to the integrity of this system. Therefore, I am ordering that these sentences be served consecutively. That means one after the other. That is a total of 18 months of incarceration, effective immediately. I know exactly who you are. And for the next 18 months, you are not the mayor's son. You are inmate number 4923. And I want to be very specific about the conditions of your confinement. I am marking your file no special protective status. Unless there is a verified threat to your life, you will be housed in the general population. You will eat the same food, wear the same jumpsuit, and follow the same rules as the people you threatened to have fired. There will be no weekend release. There will be no work release to consult for your father's campaign. Furthermore, I am imposing a fine of $15,000. But unlike your lawyer's suggestion, this money will not be a donation. It is a penalty, and it will not come from your father's blind trust. I am ordering a forensic accounting of your personal assets. If you have a Rolex on your wrist, sell it. If you have a trust fund, liquidate it. You will pay this fine yourself, or you will serve additional time. Counsel, control your client before I add a contempt of court charge to his tab. Look around you. Look at the officers standing behind you, the ones you called clowns, the ones you said worked for you. Bailiffs, take the defendant into custody. Remand him immediately to the Department of Corrections to begin his sentence. The lease on your arrogance has officially been evicted, and let the record show the defendant is now being handcuffed, not by his employees, but by the law. Please, everyone, settle down. The defendant has been removed. The sentence has been passed. But our work here today is not quite finished because a case like this leaves a residue. It leaves a question in the air that hangs heavier than any verdict. For the past 48 hours, the citizens of this city have been asking one question on social media, in coffee shops, and in their living rooms. Will he get away with it? That question hurts me. It should hurt all of us. Because the moment our citizens assume that justice is for sale, we have lost something more valuable than any budget can replace. We have lost trust. To the officers of the police department, specifically Sergeant Miller, I want to apologize to you, not on behalf of the defendant. He made his own choices, but on behalf of a system that made you doubt whether your badge meant anything when facing a politician's son. Today, I hope we answered that doubt. Your badge represents the shield of this community, and no one is allowed to poke holes in it. To the parents watching this, and I know many of you are, do not mistake what happened here for cruelty. What I did to Julian Sterling today was the most compassionate thing anyone has done for him in 24 years. I stopped him. I stopped him before he killed someone behind the wheel of a car he didn't earn. I stopped him before his arrogance escalated from poking a chest to pulling a trigger. I stopped him before he became a permanent menace to society. If you love your children, teach them that no is a complete sentence. Teach them that their worth is not determined by what they can get away with, but by what they contribute. If you give a child everything they want, you are stealing the one thing they need, character. And to the young people watching, the thousands of you who follow Julian on Instagram, who saw him laughing at the law, I want you to understand something very clearly. The flex is over. Social media has convinced a generation that being untouchable is the ultimate goal. That flashing money, disrespecting authority, and acting like a gangster is a shortcut to respect. It is not. It is a shortcut to a cell. Real power is not about who your father is. Real power is having the integrity to admit when you are wrong. Real power is treating the person cleaning the floor with the same respect as the person signing the checks. Julian Sterling thought he was powerful because he could threaten people. Now he is powerless because he has lost his freedom. Do not follow his path. Do not let the illusion of wealth blind you to the reality of consequences. Finally, to Mayor Sterling. I know the feed has likely been cut in your office, but the record of this court is permanent. You have a choice to make, Mr. Mayor. You can attack this court, you can rally your donors, and you can try to exact political revenge for what happened today, or you can be a father. You can visit your son, not as a mayor, but as a parent. You can look him in the eye through the glass partition and tell him that you love him enough to let him learn this lesson. The choice is yours, but know this courtroom is not a campaign stop. It is a fortress of the law. And as long as I am sitting in this chair, the drawbridge will never be lowered for privilege. This session is concluded. Court is adjourned. You just watched the exact moment reality collided with delusion. Julian Sterling walked into that courtroom believing his father's title was a shield. He thought a poke to a police officer's badge was a joke. He thought a phone call from the mayor's office could rewrite the law. But he walked out as inmate number 4923. This case wasn't just about a bar fight or a traffic stop. It was a stress test for the justice system. And for once, the system passed. Judge Boyd didn't just sentence a man, he dismantled a mindset. He proved that in a true democracy, the law is the one line that cannot be bought, bullied, or negotiated. Now, I want to turn this over to you. The jury is in the comments section. Judge Boyd handed down a sentence of 18 months, consecutive, not concurrent. Some critics are already saying it's too harsh for a first-time offender. Others say it wasn't enough for someone who threatened to ruin a police officer's career. So, I'm asking you, was this sentence fair or was it an overcorrection? And tell me this, at what specific moment did Julian lose his case? Was it when he poked the badge? Was it when he live streamed his arrest? Or was it when he stood in court and checked his Rolex while his lawyer begged for mercy? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you believe that justice should be blind, that a mayor's son should face the same handcuffs as anyone else, then hit that like button. It helps us get this message to more people. And if you want to see more cases where entitlement gets shut down by reality, make sure you are subscribed. Because in this channel, we don't just watch court, we watch justice being restored. This is Judge Boyd mode. Class dismissed.
Good morning. Before this court hears a single case today, the truth must be spoken clearly. This is not just about disorderly conduct. This is about power, privilege, and whether the law bends for the powerful. Julian Sterling did not walk into that bar as an ordinary citizen. He walked in believing his last name was a weapon. When he threatened a business, mocked a police officer, and poked a badge meant to protect this city, he crossed a line far greater than bad behavior. He challenged the authority of the law itself. For years, money and influence erased his consequences. But today, those walls collapsed. This courtroom does not recognize political bloodlines. It recognizes actions. And those actions showed arrogance, entitlement, and contempt for justice. This sentence is not revenge. It is correction. Because democracy survives only when no one is untouchable. Today, the law spoke louder than privilege. And for the first time in his life, Julian Sterling heard the word that changes everything. No.